Okay, I see we've got a big group here and that you guys are already finding the Q&A options. That's great. We're going to get started in a few minutes here because we do have a ton of attendees registered today. I'm going to give everybody a few more minutes to join before I start the official presentation. But while we do that, I can give you guys a few little pieces of information that you will definitely want to know for this meeting. First of all, my name's Jelena. I am an LSATMax instructor. I took the LSAT in June of 2017 and was fortunate enough to score a 178 on my first try. That was not because I was magically automatically a 178. That was because I came up with a really good study plan for myself and actually taught myself study skills that I had never ever had before I took the LSAT. And then I kind of fell in love with the LSAT and kept teaching the LSAT instead of going to law school. So I have been fortunate enough these past few years to have students get into a lot of wonderful law schools. I have some applicants still waiting to hear back this year, hoping to have some people going to amazing law schools, already have some people going to amazing law schools this year, and hoping to have even more of my students there. So hoping that this webinar can help put all of you on that list of my students, friends, and associates who've gotten into amazing law schools. So that being said, we are here today to talk about the application process, which some of you may be kind of trying to do at the last minute this year, and probably most of you are thinking of doing more like next year. A couple of little housekeeping items. One is my colleague Claire, who is a very experienced expert in this entire process. We've been working together for a couple of years now. She is in the chat to help you, and she may also be answering your questions in Q&A, especially if they're kind of more housekeeping or specific to LSATMax questions that aren't necessarily as closely related to the presentation. Claire will take care of those. The questions that are more close to the presentation, I will try to answer live as much as I possibly can. Now, speaking of that chat, you can see that there's two separate options here. There's chat and Q&A. So for chat, if you want to talk to everybody, you're going to have to change that little blue drop down to all panelists and attendees. If it just says all panelists, you're just talking to me and Claire, and your fellow attendees are not going to see your chat. I'm going to stay out of the chat so that I can focus on the Q&A on the presentation. So if you have questions for me, use that Q&A. So let's see how we're doing. All right. So I see that we've got a bunch of questions already. Rest assured, I am going to get to all of your questions. Love that you guys had those prepared. There were even some that were emailed in earlier that we will also get to as well. And we are going to do some extra Q&A at the end of this presentation. So if you have the time to stay more than the hour that we have scheduled for the presentation, I will continue doing Q&A. We're going to keep that up. And at that point, if you guys want to raise your hands and I can unmute you and we can talk via voice as well too, we can totally do that. So a couple of, okay, let's see. There's a couple of questions. The LSAT once. However, I took about 40 practice tests before I took the LSAT. So, you know, I took the LSAT about 41 times. And at this point, I've taken it a lot more than that because I've taken pretty much all of the practice tests that have been released at this point. Definitely all of the logic games, love them. If anybody has an into LSAC, please, I've been trying to get them to print books of extra logic games so I can have more. Please tell them that I would like to buy a book. But I only actually did one actual official LSAT. I'm weird that way. I'm unusual. Most people these days take it at least twice. So let's see. Let's go ahead and get started. I think we've given people a chance to join here. So I'm going to share my screen. And I do have a little presentation to go through. Keep putting your questions in. If they are, you know, related to what I'm on, I may take them while I'm going through this, but at the Q&A at the end, I will definitely do my best to get to everything. So we are gathered here today to talk about getting you guys into law school. So over the next hour, I'm going to walk you through everything that it takes to apply, including the timeline, what your complete application will contain, and of course the personal statement. I see we've already got some questions about personal statements, and that is a big piece of what we're doing here today. So really, if you come out of this webinar with one thing, it's going to be a great start to your personal statement. If that's what you're here because you're unsure about, you are in the right place. So before I get started, just a little bit more about what we are offering you as thanks for joining our webinar. You are going to get a 19% discount on our premium course for the first 24 hours after this email goes out, and then it will be 15% off that is good for a full 6 months. So no matter when you're going to start studying for your LSAT, if you would like to use our premium course to prepare, you will be getting a discount on it. Now, go ahead and look in the chat. Claire has put a link in the chat to a seminar booklet so that you can follow along with me. So go ahead and get that open. You're going to want it as we go through. And let's get started. So first of all, timeline, very important. So I get a lot of questions about when should I take my LSAT so that I can apply to law school at the right time? To know that, you've got to know when the right time to apply to law school is, when they're reviewing applications. Most of them start in October for the school year the following autumn. So basically, this October, they're going to start looking at applications for students that are going to start in August of 2021 as 1Ls. Now, there are exceptions. For instance, there are still a few schools that are reviewing applications now for fall start. There are some schools that have mid-year start, but generally, especially when you're looking at the higher ranking law schools, if you're trying to go to, say, the top 14 or top 25 law schools, you're going to want to apply in early fall for the following fall. So pretty much all of the schools are going to review at least through February. A lot of them stop, especially those top schools that know that everybody that's going to apply to them is going to apply to them first. Nobody's going to be like, oh no, I didn't get into UC Davis, so I'm going to panic apply to my safety school, Stanford. So those top ranking schools, they cut their applications off at the end of February generally, a few of them even earlier. However, many of the lower ranking schools keep their application windows open until June. I've personally had students get into law school after applying in June. It does happen. It doesn't happen with those top 25 schools, but it does happen with some more localized law schools. So if you are still trying to go this year and you don't really care about the ranking of the school as much as you care about the location and that you like the program, it's not necessarily too late for these more localized state schools. Now, most law schools do rolling admissions, so that basically means if I'm the head of admissions at a school, I might start with 300 available seats in my class. That's my next year's class, and I have that on a board in my office, and I can start giving away seats as soon as people start applying for them. So if I get an amazing application that first day in either October, or some schools even are now opening up in late September, then I can give a seat away that day. However, I'm also going to want to have some to give away if an amazing applicant comes in January or in February. So I'm not going to give all of my 300 seats away in October. Probably if people completely blow me away, yeah, they'll get a seat, but I might be a little cautious and save some applications for a consider pile that I can reply to later, say in December or January, if I still want to bring those people in. It's a little bit of a version of, if you guys know the philosophical exercise, the secretary problem. It's a man is trying to hire a secretary, and you're trying to figure out, you can only interview each secretary once, and you're trying to figure out who the best secretary is, knowing that when you hire a secretary, you don't get to interview the rest of the pool. So that's how law school admissions, the director of admissions, that's their job. They're trying to get the best students that will accept them, because of course, sometimes the very best students are going to be lost to a different school. But they're trying to get those students without filling up their class before maybe a bunch of better students are going to come in. So here's the paradoxical thing about this. It is best to apply early. The best time to apply is the first week of the admission season. However, the second best time to apply is not necessarily the second or third week of the admission season. A lot of schools do actually save a lot of seats towards the end. So if you can, have your application ready to go at the beginning of October as soon as possible. But if you can't do that, or if you think you can significantly increase your LSAT score or do something else that's going to make you a significantly better candidate for your target schools, it might be worth putting off that application until November or even December. I like people to try to get them in before winter break, which tends to be a little bit of a surge. But especially if you can raise that LSAT score, that can be more valuable than having your application in on the first day. Now, there is something called early decision. A lot of you may be considering that if you have a school that is really your absolute top school. There's nowhere else that you would prefer to go to law school than this particular place. Early decision is a contract. In other words, you are signing that if you get accepted there, say you do early decision at NYU, if you get accepted to NYU, you are going to NYU, even if Harvard, Yale, and Stanford all tell you that they've accepted you the next week. Or even if you're offered a full scholarship with incredible perks to UCLA the next week. So it really does restrict your options. For most cases, I don't recommend it. However, if you do have a dream school that you would attend, absolutely regardless of where else you got in, where else you got offered financial aid, then go ahead and do early decision. It does tell them that you are super passionate about that school and you love it. And sometimes that can, especially if you're marginal for that school, if you're marginal for their stats, sometimes that can actually help you. But for most students, early decision is not necessarily a good idea. So one more thing that you need to know about applying, basic, credential assembly service. And I know somebody emailed in a question about the credential assembly service before this webinar even started. What do you have to pay LSAC for? Can you pay them piece by piece? Do you have to pay them all at once? Yeah, so LSAC, the Law School Admission Council, they not only run the LSAT, they also run your process of getting into law school. However, they are much less dedicated to torturing you in this side of their business. The LSAT is their opportunity to torture you. Credential assembly service is actually a pretty good service. You do have to subscribe to it. There's no choice. You generally want to subscribe when you are ready to start piecing your application together. We're going to talk about the pieces of a complete application in just a moment. But it's basically a secure online document portal for law school applicants. You're going to get your transcripts there. You're going to put your letters of recommendation there. You will decide which schools you want to send it to, and then LSAC will send it on for you. It's CAS, Credential Assembly Service, and it actually even allows you to send different things to different schools. So it's not just going to send the same application to every school. You might do a different personal statement or a different resume highlighting different things that you think different schools might value about you. So speaking of those elements of the application, you can upload anything to Credential Assembly Service at any time as long as you have already paid them for a subscription, but it does not go anywhere until your application is complete. Literally, it just sits on LSAC servers. They don't send it to law schools. They don't see it. They don't review it. So before any law school admissions person will ever see your application packet, first of all, you need an LSAT score. There are a handful of schools that do accept a GRE score instead of the LSAT. There are a few like unaccredited law schools that will accept you without an LSAT. And then now there is one law school in Oregon that for a certain number of people who went there for undergrad as well and were top of their class, you can go to. But if you're serious about going to law school, if you want to give yourself options, you have to have that LSAT score. Don't rely on GRE. Don't rely on applying to those handful of schools that will consider you without it. You need the LSAT score. And that means not only have taken the LSAT score, but have received that score back. You have an official score report on Credential Assembly Service. You also need transcripts from everywhere that you went to school before your first bachelor's degree. So like for me, when I was in high school, I was put in an advanced placement program that was actually a college class that was given at my high school. And so that grade, that goes into my LSAC profile. That goes into my law school application GPA. Even though that was never actually a part of my undergraduate GPA where I got my bachelor's degree, that one class that I took on my high school campus from a school that I never actually attended, I had to get that transcript. And not only that, like, they can find out about it because I had completely, when I went to assemble my credentials, I had completely forgotten that this class ever happened because it's been a while since I was in high school. They actually found it, flagged it for me, and said I was missing a transcript. So don't try to hide anywhere you've been. They will find even things that you've forgotten that you attended. There's some other little torturous things about this LSAT GPA. One of them is that a no pass counts as an F, even if your undergraduate institution did not count it in your GPA. If you had like one weird semester of community college, yes, I did this, where you kind of blew everything off and failed all of your classes, then even if you somehow got your four-year institution to not consider that in your GPA, that goes into your LSAT, Credential Assembly Service GPA. So for most people, their GPA through LSAC is going to be lower than the GPA on the college transcript where they got their bachelor's degree. That is a bummer. The only silver lining that I can give you to that is that it affects everyone. And more people these days do have these weird, like they took 2 college classes in high school, or they did a semester of community college before they traveled for a year and then decided to take university seriously. So you're competing against people who are in the same position as you, and you all are probably dealing with a little bit different GPA from LSAC than you have on your bachelor's degree transcript. Now, if you are still undergrad before your first bachelor's degree, if you still have some opportunities to take classes, this is a really good time to get a lot of A's and get that GPA up before you get dinged with that Credential Assembly Service LSAC GPA. So where does that GPA go? So go ahead and take a look at page 4 of the digital packet that Claire put out. This shows academic index. So the academic index is all about the combination of LSAT and GPA. So on page 4, you'll see what combination of LSAT and GPA is competitive at different schools that occupy some different places in the US News and World Report pecking order. Somehow, US News and World Report got itself assigned the source of truth about law schools for all of America, but don't know how that happened, but that's what they are now. We rely heavily on them to rank law schools. So those 2 numbers are basically what gets your application sorted into one of 3 piles, either an admit, a consider, or a deny. Now, admit doesn't mean there's no combination of LSAT and GPA that is an automatic admission, even if you have your 4.0 GPA and a 180 LSAT. Especially for the top schools, that's not like, oh, we're not even going to look at your personal statement. They always, before admitting somebody, they always read your letters of recommendation. They always read your personal statement, any additional essays you've submitted, look at your resume. But people that are a strong potential for admit versus people who, we're going to look at them, but they're a weaker potential for admit. And then there are, although of course the schools never release these numbers and never tell us what those margins are, there are people who will just get sorted solely from the academic index into the deny pile because there's just no way that the school is ever going to admit somebody with that LSAT and GPA. Now, each school uses those same 2 numbers, but they may weight them differently. In general, the LSAT accounts for about 60% of your academic index score, and your GPA is 40%. Why is that? Well, everybody takes the same LSAT. They may take different administrations, but the test is administered by the same body, it's graded the same way, and it's graded on a curve so that ideally a 170 or a 160 mean exactly the same thing, whichever test that you took. That's not true of a GPA. Your, say, a 3.5 GPA from Yale is probably very different from a 3.5 GPA from, I don't want to be mean to any school. We've got so many people on that there may be somebody that went to any school that I could possibly pick on. So I'm just going to say a low-ranking local undergraduate institution. So if they made GPA their primary consideration here versus the LSAT, they would really be kind of stacking the deck unfairly against people who maybe had to work a little harder or be a little bit more talented to get those high grades at their undergrad institution. Um, one so one other thing, the LSAT takes priority because it is very specific to law school. GPA, your GPA might have something more to do with like, oh, you were in the music studies program or you were in this very hard quantum physics program. LSAT, same topic, same thing for everyone. So, although those scores could potentially get you in, you need to look at the percentiles here. The percentiles are public information. You can get them on any school's website. They disclose them. The 25th percentile is the first percentile to look at. That's basically the cutoff point where that is worse than 75% of other people who are admitted to the school. So if you're below a school's 25th percentile, you have a fairly low chance of getting in. If you're below the 25th percentile, you have to assume that probably people who do get in with your scores, there's something exceptional about their application. You know, there are kind of, I've been told that there are essentially 3 things that make you stand out regardless of your LSAT and GPA. One of them would be publishing a best-selling book. The other is being an Olympic athlete. And the third is founding a major company. If you haven't done any of those, you might have a problem if you're below the 25th percentile. The 50th percentile, that's the mean. That's where half of the people who got in had worse scores than you, half of the people who got in had better. And by the way, that is there for LSAT and GPA. You get published medians for both LSAT and GPA. So if you're below the 50th percentile, again, that means that you're really going to have to work on emphasizing whatever else about you there is. Hope that they read your essays carefully. Hope that your references are extra glowing. Now, if you look at that number on the right on those percentiles, the 75th percentile, if you're above the 75th percentile, especially if you're above it on both LSAT and GPA, you have a very strong chance of being admitted. Certainly no guarantee. Everything changes, law school rankings change, medians change, but you're in very good shape. You're also going to need a personal statement. And like I said, that's a very big piece of this presentation today. We are going to get to there in a moment. And 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. Ideally, those are professors. Now, that is more targeted to those of you who are currently or have recently been in school. If you've been out of school for like 10 years, 5 years, then still try to get a professor to write you a letter of recommendation. Look for anybody that would remember you, that would genuinely be like, oh, you were one of my students that stood out to me. I actually still think about you. I talk about you to my other students. Anybody who will really stick up for you, try to find at least one. If you can't find 2 or 3 professors that remember you if you've been out of school for a while, most schools will accept letters of reference from supervisors at work. But keep in mind that the people that are reviewing your application, they tend to be, at least in large part, a committee of professors at that law school. So if they're choosing people that are going to be in their class next year, what they want to know is, are you a delightful student? Are you wonderful to teach? And the people who can tell them that are your professors. So really make an effort to get those academic references no matter how long you've been out of school. If you absolutely can't use work supervisors, make sure they're glowing. Couple tips on letters of recommendation. Ask early. Ask at least 6 weeks before you plan to apply. This especially goes double for you guys who are at very large undergraduate schools that maybe your professor is being asked the same question by literally dozens of their students. Ask early. If you are the first one to ask them, you are the most likely to actually get them to follow up and write you that letter. You may have to follow up a bunch of times. They're going to have to send that letter to the Credential Assembly Service. They don't send it to you. You then have to fill out a form and check a box where you waive your right to see the contents of the letter of recommendation before schools see it. It is scary, I understand. You might feel like, especially if you're somebody who struggles with anxiety, you might feel like, oh, what if they said something negative about me and I check this box and then I never know, and I never know that that's why I didn't get into law school. Don't worry about that. Check the box, because schools are going to see whether or not you check the box. And if you don't check the box that waives your right to see your letters of recommendation, they're going to think that your professor is not able to be fully truthful because they know that you're watching. Now, look, in reality, if you are asking the right professors, if you're asking people that you really have a good relationship with, they're just going to show you the letter. Whether you ask for it or not, most professors will just be like, hey, just so you know, this is the letter that I submitted for you, and they'll share it with you. So don't worry about it, check the box. Recommenders, before they write your letters of recommendation, show them your personal statement. If you can't sit down with them in person, which you cannot do right now, talk to them over Zoom, get on the phone, read them your personal statement, help them understand the argument you're making for why you are an ideal future law student for the institutions you're applying to. If you're worried that your professor might not remember your work that well, remind them. Be like, oh, hey, remember when I had my econ final and you said that it was the best final paper that you'd seen in 10 years? Could you mention that in the letter of recommendation, please? Give them some direction. And then if they don't get back to you right away, follow up, but do it tactfully. Try to send them, maybe you could send them a news article that made you think of them, or say, oh, I just forgot this little, I forgot to mention that time in class where you said that my experiment was the best in the class. Could you maybe consider that? Or, oh, just so you know, remember that I was the head of the student government when I was an undergrad. Don't just be like, hey, where's my letter of recommendation? Kind of do that little dance of pretending that you're checking in with them for another reason, and then be like, and by the way, just to remind you, I'm trying to apply on the 15th of October, so I'd love to have my letters of recommendation in by then. Then you've also got to include in your application a resume. This is not the same resume that you used for undergrad. Don't put in all of your high school varsity sports and internships. Make it what you've been doing with your life since college, or if you are doing K to JD, in other words, kindergarten to law degree, you're not going to take any time off in between. Put in your college stuff. Make sure that your resume goes well with your application. And if you are somebody who's applying to law school with some years of work experience, but there's a large gap in the resume, you might have to add an addendum. So addenda and diversity statements are additional essays that most schools accept, but most make optional. Usually an addendum means that there is something that is negative in your application that you want to explain to your law schools. In other words, say maybe you have an arrest on your record from when you were 15 years old and stupid, and they've got a little form that says oh, you have to put an addenda if you've ever been arrested, even as a juvenile. Then you would want to put that in. Now, that's something that you probably, if you're going to disclose anything, you probably do want to write an addendum. We'll talk about how to do those addenda later. The one thing that I will say right now is don't worry too much about addenda. There are a lot of people who will be in the same applicant pool as you that have to write an addendum. You are not the only one. And people with addenda get into law school all the time. All they want to hear is that you're a responsible student now. You also might want to file a diversity statement. So this is, again, optional. It's about how your presence in the student body would help to diversify that law school's population. Now, most people think of this in connection to race, religion, country of origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity. Those are not necessarily the only things you can write a diversity statement about. What you are doing is you're making an argument that something about you, your experience and perspective, is uniquely valuable to the law school community, and that they would be missing something incredible if they went without you. Most students don't need to do this, though, because the personal statement really already does say how unique you are. So if there's something that you haven't talked about in your personal statement that makes you a uniquely diverse candidate, like some of you have various multiple axes of diversity, like maybe you wrote your personal statement about how you have lived your life and become a future law student while living with a disability, but you maybe want to write a diversity statement about your sexual orientation. That might be a good thing to do, but remember, there is no obligation to do it. Even if you do fall into a diversity category, you don't have to do it. If you want to, if you have something to say, go ahead and do it. If it's going to be redundant given your personal statement and sound like a second essay on the same topic or a second page of your personal statement, you might not want to do that. Now, speaking of that personal statement, go ahead and turn to page 6 of that digital packet that Claire shared. So there are some personal statement prompts there, and let's see, let's have some fun. Can somebody raise their hand to read some of those personal statement prompts for me? And I know there are a couple of people who already had their hands raised, so I'm going to assume that those were for questions and ignore those. But can somebody who would like to read a couple of personal statement prompts from the packet raise their hand, please? Awesome. Abdul, I'm unmuting you. Unmute. There we go. All right, read me a personal statement prompt, Abdul.
The Georgetown one?
Sorry, go ahead.
You want me to do the Georgetown one?
Sure, go for Georgetown. Let's do that one.
All right. You may write your personal statement on any subject of importance that you feel will assist us in our decision. Please doublespace.
How about another one? Let's do one more.
Please provide a separate essay not to exceed 2 double-space type pages. No.
Yeah, what's like the first thing that jumps out to you about those prompts?
It's like they're very short.
They're super wide open. This is not like when you applied for undergrad, you probably had to write some essay like, what 3 famous people living or dead would you want to have lunch with?
Yeah.
These law school personal statement prompts, every single one of them is going to be this vague. Thank you for that, Abdul. I'm going to just remute you now, but I appreciate you being the willing penguin to raise your hand and talk. So every single personal statement prompt that you ever get is going to be wide open. You essentially have to pick your own topic. It's the tell me about yourself question, which is everybody's favorite question in the job interview, right? Like, of course, you can talk about yourself all day when you're out to drinks with your friends. You have nothing about yourself to talk about when you're in a job interview or writing your personal statement. So even this long one, this Berkeley one, 4 double-space, bring to the study of law, it just says the same thing that Georgetown does. It just says it in a lot of words. It's like, here are the subjective qualities you bring to the study of law. It's another tell me about yourself. So your personal statement can be on any topic, really, but it should assure your reader of 2 things. You will succeed during law school, and you will bring a unique perspective and set of experiences to the law school that will enrich the student body. So let's see. Let's pop into the chat, and what are some ideas that you guys have for what a good personal statement should say? I am gonna go ahead and pop up the chat here. I'm not usually looking at the chat because I'm looking at the Q&A, but like, throw in the chat what you think a good personal statement should say, or a good topic for a personal statement. I know this is a super, super wide open question, but I like having a little debate on it because it's less boring than just listening to me talk for an hour. How well you deal with clients. Yeah, that could be a good one if you have work that you deal with clients. Experience in the Marine Corps. Yeah, absolutely. That could be a great one. Why are you here? How did you get there? Event that led you to choose law school. Keeping people safe from bears. Oh my God, I could have used you last night, Lauren. It was not a real bear, but somebody abandoned a giant teddy bear outside of my house, and it was really sad. Being a single mom. Yes, absolutely. So I'm noticing a theme here for a lot of these, which is really, really common, the overcoming an obstacle personal essay. Now, a lot of people think that your personal statement has to be about how you've overcome an obstacle in life. It definitely can be, and a lot of them are. It doesn't have to be. Don't feel like you don't have a good personal statement unless you have some kind of obstacle that you've overcome. If you have overcome significant adversity, then yes, absolutely, that is a great, I'm seeing overcoming mental illness, living with epilepsy, these being a single mom, first generation student, medical complications. Absolutely, these could all be great personal statements. But if you don't have something like that, then don't feel like you're going to have a lousy personal statement and you have to somehow come up with, like, sometimes one of the mistakes people will make is, oh, well, I need to have a adversity personal statement, so I'm going to write about, like, my parents divorcing when I was 3, and we still, like, lived in a very privileged gated community, but they were divorced. If you have to kind of make up adversity, don't do it. You can be really unique in another way. Anything that says why you will succeed during law school, both academically and socially, and why you will bring a unique perspective and set of experiences to law school that will enrich the student body. Anything that does that can be a great personal statement. So, how do you come up with your topic? We are going to do that together. Go to page 5 of your packet. There's a little chart here, and I'm putting it up on the screen as well. And I'm going to give you 3 minutes to fill in that little chart. So I'm going to shut up for 3 minutes and maybe type to some questions if I can find some questions that I can answer quickly. There's room for 3 different ideas. Try to get at least one in right now. If you're a super fast writer, get all of them in. And the categories that you're going to talk about, that you're going to fill in: what do I do that's unique? What does that unique thing say about me as a person? And how does that show that I'll make a unique contribution in law school? That could be hobbies, life experiences, academic interests, sports, anything. And if any of these things you guys just put in chat could potentially make a great personal statement. But we're going to take it to that next level of showing how it's going to make you a great law student. All right, so 3 minutes beginning now. And then we will talk about some of these. All right. So let us talk about what you guys filled in. So you probably found that it was super easy to come up with something you do that's unique. And what that says about you as a person in that second box is not that hard either. But probably most of the people in the webinar struggled with the last box. How does that show that you'll make a unique contribution in law school? I have a trick for doing that. There's no one right answer. It's very, very personal to who you are. But the method for doing it, consider the opportunities available in law school. Think about what you might like to participate in and what is closest to what you wrote about your unique self in your chart. So for instance, classroom discussion, legal clinics, public service, moot court, mock trial, journals, student government, being a research assistant to professors. If you have an incredible research background, they might want to know about that so that they can be like, oh, I want this person because I want to hire them as my research assistant. Any of those, as well as things that are unique about what to apply, about the school that you're applying to, programs that you are specifically considering, anything that is going to connect what is unique about you as a person, what that unique thing that you do says about you, to a specific opportunity that you would like to participate in law school. So let's see. Let's do an example. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to lower all of the hands real quick so that you can then raise your hands again. So raise your hand if you have a filled out 1, 2, 3 chart that you would like to maybe workshop as an example for the class. Okay, Caleb, you are right on the ball. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, I think I remuted you. Unmute. There we go. Okay, Caleb, tell me about your 3 boxes. What does your chart say? Caleb, are you able to talk? Oh, there we go. I think we can hear you now.
You can hear me now?
Yeah, you are super quiet for me though.
Okay. Can you hear me?
That is much better. Okay, tell me about your 3 boxes on your little chart there.
Okay, so my unique experience, what I do is unique, is the first one. I'm a military veteran. I served for 4 years in the U.S. military, and as part of that, I was deployed overseas to Afghanistan. What does that unique thing say about me as a person? It gave me a lot of insight into how people interact around the world in different cultures and different settings. And it showed me how the rules and the laws that people live under can have a major effect on their lives. And what that says about my unique contribution is I'll bring that experience and knowledge into to my desire to make the world better for people by changing laws, by writing better laws. And specifically, I'm thinking in 2 areas of public service and international law that really interest me.
Okay, great. I think we've got a really great start here. So now the one thing that we can do with this, and you have an awesome start there. Certainly, there are a lot of amazing lawyers that come out of the military. I know a few of them, and they're great lawyers. So this is something that's definitely going to, especially with the experience of being deployed to Afghanistan, that is going to stand out in the application pile. You've got a great subject there. Insight into how people live differently in different cultures, different rules, different laws affect people. That's all great too. Now, where I would go with this to make it an even stronger personal statement is, first of all, create a scaffolding for the entire personal statement around a specific story that highlights this thing. This might be a lot of the people who are reading your personal statement, they may not have traveled as much as you, and they probably have not been to Afghanistan. So even though in an abstract sense, everybody understands that in a country like Afghanistan or in a situation like being deployed in wartime, you see how very different rules and laws affect people than in our day-to-day lives in the United States. An example and a story helps people understand exactly how that plays out in people's day-to-day life. Now, whatever story you choose, the one other thing that you need to do to this to make it specific enough to be an incredibly strong essay is bring that into something that you want to do or study in law school. So if, say, if your story was something like maybe when you were, actually, you know what, you've probably got incredible stories. Do you have something that comes to mind when I say an example of how cultures, rules, and laws affect how people live?
Sure, I'll give you an example. So when I was in Afghanistan, the culture and the rules and laws that protect women are much, much weaker than the rules and laws that protect women in, say, countries like Western Europe or the United States. One specific example I can remember of is an old man who was about in his 80s took a bride of about 16 years old, and long story short, was very abusive towards her, and he could get away with that because it was, sort of like the cultural milieu or the law. There was no law protecting that woman against that domestic violence. So that's something that I can relate to, one specific example.
Okay, yeah, that's a very moving example. So then what you would do with that, and obviously that's something that when people see it, they're going to go, oh, I want to see where he's going with this. But you also really have to land that plane because you're bringing up such a serious topic. And if you were to say something that's kind of vague or doesn't really seem as serious as the topic of the conversation would bring them to want that to be, then that could harm the entire application if they feel like, oh, they bring up this serious topic and then they have something trite or generic to say about it. So to make sure that you are being specific enough to make this a killer essay, a thing to do, especially for your top schools, would be to find a specific program, a professor, a legal clinic, something where you can find something that law school offers that is very, very relevant there. So for instance, if you're applying to a law school where one of the professors that works with the program that you would be hoping to study in has experience actually working on international cases involving underage brides, you could say, one of the things that I'm really excited about this school is working with this professor who has worked on this issue. Or if you want to take it out of the international realm and talk about how you want to do public service now domestically, if you're applying to a school that has a domestic violence legal clinic, you could say, I would really love to work on this issue on the home front because I understand that even though it looks different in different countries, domestic violence and women's rights are issues all over the world that we are not dealing with in the way that we should. And I would really love to bring my understanding of different cultures and the effect of laws on human life to the domestic violence legal clinic. Or look at the different law reviews. There might be a women's rights law review, or there might be an international human rights law review. I tell most people not to mention international human rights in their law school application because there are going to be a million 22-year-olds who have no real international travel and no real human rights experience saying they want to be international human rights lawyers. Like, everybody wants to be Amal Clooney. I also want to be Amal Clooney. If it becomes possible to trade lives with Amal Clooney, I will be first in line. But most of us are not Amal Clooney. You, on the other hand, you could mention international human rights, a human rights legal clinic, or if you're going to a school that is in New York, works with the United Nations. All of those things, you have a legitimate reason to say, I have seen international human rights and I have the experience to study it. So all of those things, just bring it in, make it specific, and make sure that you land that plane on a point that is very specific, pointed, relevant, and strikes an appropriate tone for the seriousness of the subject matter without being kind of those Instagram poetry profundities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have a quick question about that, and I think some of the
Sure.
other folks in the chat have raised this as well. Being very specific in a personal statement, relating it to the work of a specific professor or something like that, that means then that you would probably have to have multiple personal statements for different schools that you apply to.
Yes.
Um, is that something you recommend, or is it okay for some students to just have a generic personal statement no matter what?
I recommend that everybody personalize their personal statement for at least their top 3 schools, the schools that you really want to go to, because they see that you have made that effort, and they see that that means that they're not just a checkbox on your list of schools. And that does actually matter to them, because not only do they want to admit the best law students, they want to admit students that are actually going to accept their admission and not just have applied to 20 different schools and be playing them against each other for financial aid, which, like, you should still play them against each other for financial aid. Please do that. That is part of the process. But their side of the game is that they want students who want them too, because they don't want to be kind of scrambling around with their wait list any more than they have to. So the more that you can show the schools that you are genuinely most interested in, that you are incredibly interested in them, the better. Now, if you're applying to 25 law schools, no, Maria, they don't see how many you're applying to. Only LSAC does see that, unless you choose to share it on one of the websites where people share data, which we can talk about a little later. Now, if you are applying to 25 or 50 schools, obviously you can't do this for everyone, but at least do like your top 3 to 5 schools, especially if you're applying to top 14 type schools. They're going to expect it. Other people are going to be doing it. Highly recommend. All right, let's see. Let us, you know what? Before we go on to addenda, let's do one more, because your statement, Caleb, is awesome, but it is also such a rare experience that I would love to, and I'm going to remute you. Thank you for being brave and sharing your personal statement, and for that very interesting story. I think you've got a great application coming, and I can't wait to hear what amazing law school you get into. Please tell us. Let's see, I'm going to lower the hands again, and then ask you guys to raise hands one more time. Can I have somebody raise their hand to share their personal statement seed who feels like maybe they don't have enough? Like they don't have a big, huge, dramatic thing. All right, let's go with Shania. I haven't seen you talk too much, so let's talk to you.
Hi,
Hi, Shania, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Tell me about your 3 bullet points.
So for one, I said that I spend like an hour sometimes learning the lyrics and vocals of a song. I'm a politics and health policy major, so it's not something that pertains to my life typically. It's just something that like gives me peace and like helps me like relax and unwind a little bit. And I said that it shows that I'm driven and focused, and that I am somewhat of a perfectionist, but that if it brings me joy, that it's worth the hard work. And then for 3, I said that it would show that I would work tirelessly for the things that I enjoy, so that I can become and to achieve all the things that I need to learn and be successful in law school, so that I can be an effective advocate for my future clients and for the things that for the organizations and things that matter to me. I'm still working out the kinks, obviously.
No, that's good. Okay, I think you've got a good start there, and I think it's going to be interesting. And yeah, I think it's going in a good direction if you go for something that's just personal, quirky, and unique. That is a totally valid and interesting way to go. And sometimes admissions teams love it when they get that, like, I love to learn songs essay in the middle of a bunch of extreme adversity essays. If they're starting to get depressed and they want an essay that's just about, I'm a fun, unique person, that can lighten their mood and make them feel really good about you. where you can make this stronger, I think there's actually a really good specific connection to law school in learning the lyrics and vocals to a favorite song. Because sometimes, you could say, you don't have to spend that time. You could just sing along with that song like everybody else at karaoke, rely on singing along with it in the car, and just, try to carry the tune as best you can. That's what most people do. You could blend in, so to speak, and not have done the homework. But if you really do the homework, in other words, analogizing it to reading the cases, doing all of the reading for your L1 classes, which a lot of L1 law students do not necessarily do the reading, if you analogize that to really doing the homework and deeply understanding and studying, because knowing something at a deep level brings you joy, and you really want to understand not just the surface, but all of the underpinnings and the roots of that thing, then you've got a personal statement that you analogize very, very well to the specific work that you're going to do in all of your L1 classes. And you can very artfully, if you could hang this maybe on a specific story about why music means so much to you and why it brings you so much joy that you study it for pleasure. And then bring that around to making the point that because you are somebody who studies deeply for pleasure, you are also going to be somebody who studies deeply for pleasure in law school and doesn't feel put upon or tortured by having to do the reading.
Thank you.
Thanks for being brave and sharing that. I think you've got, I would love to read that essay too. That sounds like a fun one. So let's talk just briefly about addenda. So like we said earlier, you might have to write an addendum if the school asks you to disclose a specific thing about your background. So for instance, there might be something like you have an arrest record, you have a record of academic suspension at a previous school, you were suspended or expelled for conduct at a previous school. Any of those things you would probably have to write an addenda. Most schools have some kind of statement like, if any of these things are true of you, you must write an addenda to explain them, and all of those things would be in those kind of conduct and fitness categories. So there also might be pieces of your application. A couple of you have put stuff in the Q&A about this, GPA specifically, that you are not proud of and that you want to explain. So that would be a voluntary addendum. Now, write an addendum only if and only if you believe that there is a legitimate explanation for this thing that you have in your background that you would like to have them maybe not consider quite as strongly as they would otherwise consider, and a reason to believe that you are not going to fail in that way again. If you can't make both the argument that there is an explanation and it won't happen again, don't bother writing the addendum, try to just brush it off. But most people do, most of these things that you have to write an addendum for happened earlier in your life and maybe are not part of the person you are today. So you do have an explanation and reason to believe it won't happen again. If you do write one, make it short, make it very heavy on the lessons learned, and be really honest. If you're going to disclose something, disclose everything about it. You don't want them to go Googling your name, and they will. They absolutely will, especially if you're like me and have an incredibly Googleable name. There is one Jelena War in the world. Everything I've ever done is out there. They're going to Google you. Do not let them find out that you hid something. If you're going to write the addendum, tell them everything. It might even make you more interesting. If there is, if there are plenty of people that my colleague Brandon always says, there are plenty of people who commit serious crimes, come out of jail, and become lawyers. Happens all the time. So it might even make you interesting. Tell them everything. Then what you do, explain what steps you've taken since then to make sure that that is part of your past and not part of your future. So for instance, let's, a slightly less heavy example of this is maybe you had a bad semester and got put on academic probation, and the reason you had a bad semester was basically just that you were immature, that you didn't know what you wanted to do with your life, you were focusing on your social life and your extracurricular activities instead of your classes, and you didn't realize your grades were slipping as badly as they had until you were already on academic probation. That's happened to a lot of people. Don't make excuses. Don't be like, well, my school really, they didn't give me a warning, and I feel like I really should have had a warning before, and I felt like my teachers, like, I felt like they should have noticed that I wasn't coming to class, like, nobody really reached out to me. Even if you do feel all those things, and you may have legitimate reasons to feel those things, don't put anything in that looks like an excuse. Give an explanation. I was immature. I blew off my classes. That was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it is. I have learned the value of an education now. I have realized what I want to do with my life, and that failing to take my education seriously will prevent me from achieving those goals. And these days, I turn off my phone when I get home from school until I've done all of my homework, and I don't go out on school nights. Easy as that. It can be like 2-3 paragraphs. They don't need to be long, just complete. All right. So we are still going to do plenty of Q&A. Before we get to that, in case folks have to drop off, I do just want to plug LSATMax a little bit. Wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in it. Tell you a little bit about how we can get you 60% of that academic index, that great LSAT score, more important than your 4-year GPA. Maybe unfair to those of you who worked really hard for that 4-year GPA, but kind of great for those of you who are like me and did not work that hard for their GPA and can outweigh it with an LSAT score. Also, other thing about a great LSAT score that we didn't really talk to here, because this is about the applications, not about what happens after you get in, but the LSAT score is also connected to how much financial aid and scholarships you are offered. The reason for that, every school is trying to up their medians. They want to be a better ranked school every year than the year before. So they incentivize high LSAT scorers to come to their school so that their median grows. And that 75th percentile, that 25th percentile, that whole thing shifts over towards the 180 side. Now, when you enroll with LSATMax, you're going to get instant access to over 100 hours of video lessons. For those of you who are already in, you know, it's all the skills you need to crush the LSAT. You're also going to have a study calendar based on your expected testing date so that you stay on task to hit your target score on time. You're going to get all 90 full-length LSATs released by LSAC. When I see that in print, it really makes me feel like I've taken a lot of LSATs. There's 90 now. Oh my God. Practice does make perfect. We also give you all 9,000 released LSAT questions. You can sort them by question type, practice them after watching the corresponding lesson. And then the really cool thing versus any other prep option is that you get complete custom analytics. Every time you answer questions, either in homework or practice tests, your performance is tracked. We show you your strengths and your weaknesses, and that allows you to target your time practicing on the things that you really need to improve on. It is all about time management. We want you to use your time wisely. All of our awesome instructors are accessible to you. We have office hours. I see some of you in the webinar who have been to my office hours before. Good to see you all again. You get all your questions answered by someone with a 99th percentile LSAT score for free. And if you don't like office hours, we have other options. There are real-time chat. We have message boards maintained by 99th percentile instructors. And we also have tutoring. The premium package does come with 3 hours of tutoring. You can always purchase extra hours as you need them. And the other thing about all of our instructors, they all did score in the 99th percentile, but we generally do not hire people that started with a high score. My first practice score was, it's been a while. It was 160. I gave myself a 164, but that was kind of cheating because I had a flood in my house while I was taking my practice test, and I gave myself a little bit of extra time to deal with the flood and come back to the test. And so I ended up being able in 2 months to increase my score 14 points before I got my 178 on the LSAT. And I think if I really had been honest about that first practice test, I probably should have scored lower. All of us knew that we wanted an elite score. We all had to work hard to get it. We know what you're going through, and it didn't necessarily come naturally to all of us. We know how to talk to somebody who it didn't come naturally to. We do have a flexible pricing plan option with a firm, and there's also a 7-day money-back guarantee. So if in the first week you realize that LSATMax is not right for you, we'll send you a full refund. Also, if you use our course materials but your LSAT score doesn't increase from your baseline on your first practice test with us, we will give you a full refund. So everybody everybody is going to get a better score or their money back. All right, so let us do Q&A, and I will hang out as long as you guys want me to. I can, well, up until 2, because then we have to use this channel for another webinar. So going over to the Q&A, LSAT conversion scale has an A+, 4.33, but my school does not grade higher than an A. Is this taken into account? Unfortunately, not really. That falls into the reasoning for why your GPA is only 40% roughly of your academic index, is because those differences between undergraduate institutions cannot really be weighed. You can, you know, if you do have like a 4.0 GPA and you feel like if you would have been at a school that grades higher than an A, you would have gotten A pluses, you could mention it in an interview if you get an interview. I wouldn't even mention it in the essays, because if you have a really high GPA, then you would probably, you kind of look like a jerk if you said, well, but it could have been a 4.33. But you could mention that in an interview if you wanted to. Do law schools at state schools place priority on in-state applicants like their undergrad programs do? Not exactly like they do. Many of them do. It varies. That would probably be something that most of these admissions departments are easier to reach than undergrad admissions departments. So you really can send them an email and they'll get back to you. So I would say if you're looking at a specific state school and you want to know how much priority they place on in-state applicants, ask them and they'll give you some kind of answer. They may not give you as full of an answer as you'd like, but they will get back to you. I mean, even like Harvard, Yale, and Stanford answer people's emails. These are schools that are looking at admitting maybe a couple hundred students a year, not several thousand like undergrads are. They have more time to talk to you. Let's see, we did answer this one about community college courses from high school. Yes, everything before your first bachelor's degree is counted in. Is grade deflation taken into account? That might be something that you should write an addendum about if you feel like grade deflation is part of your GPA and that you might not be able to give the best picture of your candidacy simply through your GPA and your academic index. I would write an addendum. They're not going to automatically take that into account. Of course, these people are all experts and they have a lot of knowledge, so they may be aware of it. It's not going to factor into your academic index, but you could write an addendum. Thomas, my study plan really has a lot in common with LSATMax's analytics. So that's one of the reasons that I like teaching at LSATMax versus any of the competitors. It actually has a lot to do with very similar to the study plan that I came up with for myself without any of these resources. I didn't use any prep companies because I wanted to study on my own. It was a personal challenge to figure out how to study for the LSAT. And what I ended up with was really, really heavily using the practice tests and then heavily making my own analytics from the practice tests to figure out what my weaknesses were. So every week I would take at least one practice test, and getting closer to the LSAT, I took 2 to 3. And then I would look at those, categorize the questions that I missed, and for the rest of the week after taking that practice test, I would only study categories, game types, and types of passages that I had missed on my last practice test. So this is kind of like the suffering for growth LSAT study plan. If you never get to practice the things you're already good at, then you never really get to feel super good about yourself. It's a little depressing, but your LSAT score goes up way faster than if you're practicing things you're already good at. So focus on the weaknesses, lots of practice tests, and do your analytics. Use those analytics. Do not just go through linearly, okay, I've watched all of the videos, I've done all the practice tests, my LSAT score should be good. Study to your personal weaknesses. We talked about personal statement topics. We talked about parts of the application, what you have to send in. Talked about my study plan. Overcoming a lower GPA from 30 years ago in no way reflective of the current applicant. This is something that you would want to put an addendum to. And also, since it's from 30 years ago, get some amazing letters of recommendation from people who know how diligent and thoughtful you are and what a great student you would be today. even if you've taken, like, I would say for your letters of recommendation, look for anybody who has been in a training role over you as a supervisor at work, who maybe had to train you for a new job. Go for those people as recommendations if they will give you a really enthusiastic recommendation, and tell them to talk about how eager you are to learn and how diligent you are at learning, so that they see that you're a different type of student than you were 30 years ago. And yes, they do pay attention to how old your GPA is, but it's still the only GPA they have to use, so I would go ahead and write the addendum. Undergrad schools and majors, yes, it does matter. They're definitely going to take more seriously an applicant with, you know, a 3.5 from Harvard than an applicant with a 3.5 from a no-name school. Once your academic index gets you into the pile, it's still your academic index that's going to get you into that pile. Let's see, I'm going to go to the bottom here actually and answer some of the most recent questions because we've got a bunch. Shayna, because of the coronavirus, CUNY is offering to make classes pass or fail. Will they still consider fails an F? This is such a fluid situation. I would say that we can possibly expect LSAC to have some changes or waivers to certain policies because of the coronavirus at some point, but you can't count on it. So if you can make good letter grades right now, I would say make good letter grades if you can. But we will, if you're on our email list, we're keeping people updated on all of the things coming out of LSAC. It's just so hard to predict anything that could happen right now because we don't know how long this is going to go on, and we can't predict what LSAC's going to do right now. Definitely, if you do end up having your GPA affected by the coronavirus, I would do an addendum. There's probably going to be a ton of coronavirus addendum next year. Focus on second time taking the LSAT. I actually only took an actual official LSAT once, but definitely I use heavily practice tests analytics. Same as when I was studying originally. Practice tests, analytics, focus on your weaknesses. Kristen, you overloaded yourself. That's, again, if your GPA, I know I'm saying this a lot, but if your GPA truly you feel does not reflect who you are as a student, then addendum, and also if you are pretty close to your undergrad years, have a professor say something in their letter of recommendation about, I saw Kristen overwhelm herself and take on more than she could handle, but something good about her came out of that. She learned a valuable lesson and became a better student afterwards. Halsey, you're an older student. You didn't do amazingly well right out of high school, stopped going to college, 18 years in the workforce in addition to your education. Yeah, focus on your time in the workforce and focus on both the most interesting things that you've done in the workforce and your most recent jobs. And definitely, like, write your personal statement about what you can uniquely bring to law school with your life experience. There are a lot of, UCLA has a group called OWLs, the older, wiser law students. Obviously, you're going to be surrounded by a bunch of 24-year-olds, but that's not the only people that will be in law school with you. There are a lot of older students who go to law school, and I think that life experience can make a really, really great personal statement. Your resume, highlight anything that you've done that kind of required language skills, reasoning skills, client-facing interaction, business skills, all of that. Highlight all of those. Malachi, I recommend online LSAT prep, first of all, because it's the only LSAT prep that anybody can do right now because we're all quarantined. But even when we can do classroom LSAT prep, as much as I really enjoy being face-to-face with a student, and I have taught classroom classes as well, at this point, the online LSAT prep is so good that there's just really no reason for the additional expense and the additional variables of in-classroom LSAT prep. There tends to be a lot more variability of the instructor quality in in-person LSAT classes. You don't necessarily, especially if you're not in like one of the couple major markets for whatever prep company you're working with, like If you're not in, New York, San Francisco, LA, it can be hard to find a really good classroom instructor versus if you go online, it's always going to be some of the best instructors out there, since they can companies that are online like TestMax can hire anywhere. And then it's just, when you're in a classroom, a lot of the time you're spending listening to your classmates talk versus focusing on your own prep, and that can be, some people find it stimulating, some people find it distracting. I think at this point the online has gotten so good, and with the test going online as well, you need to be used to working on a tablet. I would go online. Out of school for 9 years, generally, I would still try to find at least one professor who remembers you. Make an effort. If you can't find one who would write a good letter of recommendation for you, drop it and use your supervisors. But make an effort to find somebody who remembers you, and that letter of recommendation might end up being even stronger if you're able to say, oh, this student stood out to me, even though I haven't seen them in 9 years, I remember them like it was yesterday. Let's see. Would you want your most recent professors to write your letter of recommendation? Doesn't have to be your most recent professors. Make it the professors who know you the best and will write you the best letter of recommendation. Oh, which reminds me in a roundabout way, I forgot to plug my podcast. For any of you who don't get the TestMax emails already, we have a new podcast. It's available on all platforms. It's called The Legal Level. You can search for it, or Claire can put a link to that in the chat. And please listen to the podcast. And that is actually an additional opportunity for Q&A with me, because we have an email, podcast@testmaxprep.com. And if you email a question for that, we might just talk to your question on an episode of the podcast. So yes, please, if you don't mind, put a link in the chat to the podcast, and please listen. And if you like it, please rate us and review, because we're brand new and we need listeners. Okay, let's see. Michelle, that your bachelor's was in legal studies make a positive impact. Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that it does better prepare you for law school than other programs. No, in the sense that there are going to be a lot of people who have a similar bachelor's in legal studies or a bachelor's in political sciences. That just kind of puts you in one bucket of people who have known since undergrad that they want to be lawyers and have already been preparing. It's a good bucket to be in, but it's a big bucket. So try to make sure that your application stands out for more than just that, but make your letters of recommendation really, really focus on that you've basically already been an excellent law student. Write your personal statement about something else. Write your letters of recommendation about that. With COVID-19, will law schools be a little more lenient? That depends on the applicant pool. They can only choose from the applicant pool that they're getting. And if the applicant pool is broadly kind of struggling, now they may give more, for instance, they may give more fee waivers, they may be more lenient financially, but as far as admissions, it's all going to depend. If their applicant pool looks as great as it did in previous years where the economy was good and we didn't have a pandemic, they're going to admit exactly the kinds of students they would have admitted in previous years. If their applicant pool suddenly drops in their average GPA, then yeah, probably the average admitted GPAs are going to drop too. If you've been out of school for 10 years and your GPA is 3.0 range, including your addendum, just talk about why you feel that that GPA does not reflect how you'd be as a student today. Explain why it happened. Like, maybe you were 19 years old and supporting your whole family. So you had to work 2 jobs and you couldn't keep your GPA up. Or you were just immature and didn't know what you wanted to do with your life. Wherever on that spectrum that falls, give an honest answer for why your GPA was lower in the past. And then say something about how you've learned the value of education and you are really enthusiastic about becoming a lawyer and you know that you're going to study harder in the future. Misdemeanor and it's expunged. Look at your school's criteria for an addendum. So each school has different little paragraphs that say when you have to make an addendum. Many of them will say that expunged offenses are not required for an addendum. In general, I would say if you have been expunged, I wouldn't make a voluntary addendum for it. Only write an addendum if a particular school's statement says, even if it has been expunged, write an addendum for any criminal offenses. And in that case, definitely mention the expungement in the addendum if you do have to write that addendum. But for the most part, I would say expunged offenses, don't write an addendum. Law schools extended their application deadline to June. Can you still apply? Oof, you're going to be really tight, but if you get your score in time, go for it and apply. You might pull off a really wonderful success there getting in for fall of 2020. However, you are probably not going to be in as advantageous a position for financial aid as you would have been if you'd applied earlier, because a lot of their pool of money is going to be gone. Graduated undergrad in 2014. Yes, get recommendations from professors if they will be enthusiastic. If you were a mediocre student, use supervisors, use people who will rave about how great you are. Splitting, low LSAT score, high GPA. Ideally, you would like to be a splitter in the other direction. It is easier to be a splitter with high LSAT, low GPA than low LSAT, high GPA. I would recommend you try to raise your LSAT score. If you absolutely can't, then definitely, highlight your GPA, highlight how difficult your classes were on your resume if you're close to, if you're not very far out of undergrad. But really, ideally, if you have an LSAT score below most schools' 25th percentile, I would urge you to try to improve your LSAT score. It is 60% of your academic index. Volunteer at a courthouse with a lawyer. Absolutely. Yes, one of the things that they are looking for in potential law students is that you actually want to be a lawyer. A lot of people go to law school and then are like, oops, I went to law school and I found out in law school that I don't want to be a lawyer. That does not look good for the law school. They have to release their statistics on how many of their students are working in a job that requires bar passage. They want you to want to be a lawyer. And if you have done something that confirms to you that you actually like the job, not just the idea of it, that will make you stronger. Before you even start, no, Carla, you can start taking practice tests cold, but only take one cold. Take one cold as a baseline and then start studying logical reasoning skills, logic games, all of that. But do take one baseline so that you know where you're starting. Let's see. Claire, maybe Claire can take Darren's question about LSATMax assisting with personal statement. I actually do not know the answer to your question, Darren. Maybe Claire can help with that one. Get letters of recommendation from Board of Trustee members or alumni, only if they are your professors or supervisors. So like the worst letter of recommendation you can have, I almost did, like no judgment here, I almost literally did this, but the worst one is, this is the congressman that my family knows. That just makes you look like a privileged jerk. And unless they have been in a professor role or a supervisor role at work, they don't know you in the way that law schools want your recommenders to know you. However, if you worked for or took classes with the Board of Trustee members or alumni, yeah, absolutely. And you can use your alumni connections in other ways. Like, for instance, if you're on the wait list, you can ask your alumni connections if they can do anything about calling people to say that they have a great application on the wait list. You don't necessarily want them as your recommenders. Thomas, that's such a specific situation, a 3.0 from Harvard be put in the rejection pile for Yale because they're far below their 25th percentile. Honestly, my guess is probably, but Yale is very much one of the black boxes where they kind of consider the entire profile of the student and it is hard to predict them. So not necessarily. If you have a low GPA, but from a very difficult university like Harvard, I would recommend really, really focusing on your letters of recommendation. If professors are incredibly enthusiastic about a student in a way that their GPA does not necessarily reflect, that might make them stand Study abroad grades that aren't on a 4.0 scale get incorporated into the GPA. That is a really good question. I do not actually know the answer to that question for grades that are not on a 4.0 scale. We might be able to find some resources for you, but you have stumped me on that one. Is it better to wait a year or two before applying to law school, or is it better to apply right out of undergrad? Depends on what you're going to do with that year or two. A lot of law schools do like you to have some work experience, especially if it is close to the legal profession. If you've done government work for a member of Congress, should you include a letter of recommendation? If they have actually been your supervisor, if they know you, what they're looking for in that letter of recommendation is that it is clear that the recommender actually knows the student and speaks about them personally. If it's going to come off generic, the problem with members of Congress is that a lot of them are so busy that when you ask them to recommend you for things, they either make you write your own recommendation or they just give you something super generic. If they're going to be super generic, don't do it. But if they do know you personally and will enthuse about how great you are, and if they have actually been in a supervisory role, that could be a great letter of recommendation. 4 LSAT's a bad thing. There is a cap now, but as long as you're under the cap, they're just going to take your highest LSAT score. Now, if you have had your LSAT score go down, like if you were like 160, then 158, then 152, you're going to have to write an addendum about that and explain why you're not improving while continuing to study. But if your score is going up, that's only good for you. Worked at a law firm when you were 19, but you're 30 now. Mention it. Only if there's a really great story about it. Do put it on your resume. Go ahead and put it at the bottom of your resume. It won't matter very much, but if there's an amazing story from there that helped inspire you to go to law school, you could mention it in your personal statement. Working as a paralegal before law school, yeah, absolutely. A lot of great paralegals make great lawyers, especially if you have like a partner or senior attorney in your firm who's going to write you an incredible recommendation about how from the day that Michelle first started as a paralegal, I knew she would make a great lawyer. If they'll write you that letter of recommendation, that looks fabulous. Mid GPA and top percentile GRE. No, most of the top 14 do not take GRE. Harvard does. 3.6 is not a great GPA for Harvard. I would look for a great LSAT score. You might be able to get in with the GRE in a lower ranking school that takes the GRE, but most of the top 14 are not taking the GRE yet. Good resume, yes, absolutely, it factors into admission. It is not going to factor into your academic index, which is the GPA and LSAT score only, but your resume is absolutely going to help you in your admissions. And I do think that what you're saying there, Nathan, is a good resume. Thomas, these international questions, that is an area that I just do not know as much about. We might be able to find you some resources on that if you email us or reach out. Really, the converting British grades to the GPA scale is just not an area that my expertise is in. My expertise is in the US. Yeah, Michelle, I would do at least one professor letter of recommendation and at least one supervisor recommendation. Department Chair of Legal Studies is a great recommender. But I would do, since you have been working in the legal field, I would do at least one supervisor recommendation. Letters of recommendation from undergrad or grad alumni. It is helpful if they are otherwise, it is helpful if they're alumni, if they are also otherwise a great recommender, but being the best recommender is preferable to being an alumnus. So just always choose the person who will write you the best letter. Resume, keep to 1 page. If you're fairly fresh out of undergrad, then yeah, try to keep your resume to 1 page. If you've been working for 5+ years, you can get away with 2. Yeah, absolutely. Anonymous person, you can take the LSAT in August and be ready to apply by October. I do think that's possible. But yeah, law schools, they're going to be accepting students through at least February. So the August LSAT is fine. If you think you might need a couple of retakes, maybe try to be ready for the July one and have August as your retake. any undergraduate major works for law school. I see people who majored in music studies and vocal performance get into great law schools all the time. What you want, if you have a non-traditional major, then you might want to write about that in your personal statement, but the criminal justice and poli-sci are very traditional majors. They're going to know a lot about those programs. They're going to know basically exactly what kind of stuff you've done. How long does it take to hear back from LSATMax for scholarship based on LSAT fee waiver? That is probably a better question for Claire, or to email to us. I don't actually deal with that program, but I do know that it is very important to Mehran. Even when I first met our founder CEO, Mehran Abdoli, he talked about how important that LSATMax scholarship program is to him, and how really that's one of the reasons he started this company. So we do want to give that to you. I don't know how long it's taking to hear back on that right now, but we do want to help you with that. How long does it take to get your score? The score release dates are posted on LSAC's website. Maybe Claire can find a link for all of the score release dates and drop it into the chat. It's running pretty quickly now. It used to be like up to several weeks, which is terrible. But now that we're all on digital tests, it has been running a little quicker now, and they have been running in line with their posted score release dates. Someone whose English is limited writing a recommendation letter. That might be somebody who, if you and your supervisor are very close, if you could help him with translation, if you could have him write out basically the bullet points or the bare bones version of that letter, and if you could help him translate that more into astute English, I think that it would be fair for you to assist him, or if there is somebody else who could assist him, that would help. Otherwise, if he's not comfortable having assistance with his English, I do think most schools are fairly internationally savvy and would understand if he just writes something at the top of his letter that says, English is my second language, and I apologize for any difficulty reading this, but I'm doing my best. You know, most of us probably are, most of the people reading your letters of recommendation are going to have dealt with people who speak English as a second language before and are not going to judge too much. Not bad to take the LSAT more than once. Most people do at this point. Why you were a transfer student? Yeah, I would maybe put that more in your personal statement than an addendum. I don't think that that is a bad thing to be. I don't think they're going to be bothered enough by it to consider it an addendum. 2-year gap between undergrad and law school, just put on your resume what you were doing. That, again, these are not bad things. These are things that are very common. I don't think either of those needs necessarily an addendum. Does your graduate GPA have any weight in your application? No, but you can certainly have your recommenders mention it, and you can certainly put it on your resume. It will help you there. It doesn't have any weight in your academic index. Law school or business school? I would take I mean, you know, unless you really, Malachi, unless you really think you cannot get a good LSAT score, if you think a good LSAT score is impossible to you, don't take the LSAT. But it can't hurt to have both scores. I mean, yes, it can hurt a little bit financially that you have to pay LSAC $200 to take the LSAT, and that we also like don't know when the next LSAT's going to be, if we're all going to be let out of quarantine in time. But aside from those kind of world and financial factors, I would go ahead and take the LSAT, and if you get an amazing LSAT score, maybe let that be a sign to you that you should go to law school instead of business school. And if you find the LSAT really difficult, maybe that's a sign for business school. Possible to apply next month and gain admission to fall 2020. I do think it's possible at certain schools, especially as somebody else mentioned, a lot of schools are extending their deadlines right now. However, they are probably going to have spent most of their pot of financial aid before this whole pandemic broke out. So it may be difficult to get financial aid if you're accepted now. And by financial aid, I mean from schools, not federal financial aid. The school's pool of money to give scholarships may be limited now. Take the LSAT after your second year of undergrad and again after your third. Never too early to get a great LSAT score. They're good for 5 years. If you have the time to study for it, go ahead and take it, and then you have one thing out of the way. Jacob, spearheading and starting a program within the school. I maybe wouldn't go there in a personal statement. That sounds like something more for an admissions interview. If you are offered an interview, not all schools bother to do interviews. I would find, if you can't find a specific program that relates, find something that is a general thing about law school that relates. Like, for instance, classroom discussion. That's something that you could, if you really love sharing opinions and hearing others' opinions, then you might say that you're going to be really, really, really good in classroom discussions. Or research. Research is a part of all law schools. If it's not a specific program, just connect it to something more general in your personal statement. Vita, your master's GPA just is not going to connect to your academic index for law school, but put it on your resume, put it prominently on your resume. How many law schools on average do most people apply? I can only really say for the people that I've had as my own students, I would say probably most of my students apply to 10 to 15 law schools. Probably 2 or 3 that are their absolute favorites, 2 or 3 that are just like, might as well reach for it. And then kind of a scattered batch of mixed, safety and reach schools. Let's see. And I had some up here that I kind of skipped over. See if we have anything here. Is it reasonable to aim for the 170s after 155 on a practice test? I think everybody should be aiming for the 170s. Not everybody's going to get there because the curve is plotted to make sure that not everybody gets there, but I want all of my students getting to, aiming for that. But definitely that's going to take some work. That's going to take some serious work, and you're going to have to be willing to focus on your weaknesses, which is not always emotionally fun, but is good for your LSAT score. We've talked about that. Personal story, talked about that. Admissions officers tell you that internships and law experience does not give you as much of a head up as one would assume. Is that true? It depends on how much of a leg up you were assuming you'll get. Certainly it helps, not as much as a great LSAT score and great letters of recommendation. This is an interesting question from Thomas. Should you gather your recommendation letters while still in undergrad or message professors after graduation? You have to gather your recommendation letters through Credential Assembly Service. So unless you plan on paying for a subscription for Credential Assembly Service for all those years, I would not try to gather them while still in undergrad, but I would focus on maintaining a relationship with those people, check in with them. Make sure you don't totally fall out of touch and let those professors forget who you are. How frequently did you take practice tests? 1 a week when I was starting, 2 to 3 a week when I was closer to my test. Another question about splitting for mid-tier schools, 3.9 into 155 to 160 for mid-tier. I think you've got a good chance of getting in some places. Get really great letters of recommendation. If you can raise your LSAT score by retaking, do. But I don't think you're in a horrible place there. You definitely would rather be a splitter with high LSAT and low GPA than high GPA, low LSAT. But really pump up your personal statements and letters of recommendation and give it a try. Margarita, I don't know if you're still with us. Apply to law school if you have an undergraduate degree in law from another country. There actually are a number of law schools that have specific degree programs that are for people who are lawyers in other countries who want to come and practice here. I know UCLA, pretty much all of the law schools in California, which were the ones that I was looking into, have such programs. So I would look into one of those specific programs, which might be like a Doctor of Legal Studies, that kind of thing, versus just starting over with a JD here. I think I've talked about a lot of this. Trying to go from 135 to 90th percentile. Love that you're shooting for the stars, whoever this anonymous person is. I would recommend registering for August, but planning on retaking in October. You're probably going to have at least one retake. Most people do. Let's see, I'm bump down to the bottom here. Got a few new here. Have I heard of elementary school teachers being accepted to law school? I haven't happened to have an elementary teacher as one of my students who is accepted to law school. I have had educators, not specifically elementary teachers, accepted to law school, but I actually think that law schools would love that background. I think, you know, if you can write a great personal statement about, as an elementary teacher, you've dealt with chaos, you've dealt with arbitrary rules that you have to enforce even though they change all the time, broken governmental systems if you were in public education, all sorts of things that are extremely, extremely related to the legal system. And you can write, I think you could write kind of a personal statement that has a lot of humor in it, but that also really shows how you bring great skills to the legal profession. Plan B, school first year, then transfer. That does work for a lot of people. A lot of people make that plan. If you have any other options to get into your top law school other than relying on that, you know, better to get in and start there, because of course L1 year is hard on everybody. It's not necessarily a valid plan to be like, okay, obviously I'm going to be at the top of my class L1 year and every school will want me, because law school is graded on a true curve, not just curve like the LSAT, like truly curved as in there are only a certain numbers of A's that can be given out in most schools' classes. So once those A's are gone, nobody else gets an A. So there are a very limited number of people who can have amazing grades in law school, and everybody is competing for that. But it's an acceptable backup plan. I wouldn't recommend it as a first plan. With the test cancellations, should you be working on your applications? You can work on your personal statement anytime, and the better that it is, the better your chances of admission are. Personal statements really matter. I would work on those, and also work on raising your LSAT score if you can. 3.8, 170. I would say that is a low shot at Yale. I'm not going to tell anybody they don't have a shot at Yale, because Yale is very much a school that looks at the whole person, not just the numbers, because everybody who applies to Yale and is anywhere in the consider pile has the numbers. So they're looking at more than just that. I don't personally know of anybody with those numbers who's gotten into Yale, but I would not discourage you from applying. Just really make sure that the qualitative aspects of your application are amazing. STEM with GPA, yeah, all of that, the difference in the grading standards by major, all of that stuff is why the LSAT score is so important. The LSAT is meant to be what balances that out. So really, really focus on your LSAT score, and then just trust that admissions people, once you get into at least the consider pile, they will understand that STEM majors are graded a little harder. Will it hinder you if you graduated from a law school that's not as popular? Well, it's hard to say right now, because you're going to be practicing law in at least 3 years, so the market may change in those 3 years, especially given that the economy is on a roller coaster right now, and whenever the economy is on a roller coaster, the legal profession is on a roller coaster. Nobody pays their legal fees before they pay their rent. But if the legal economy stays roughly like it is now, the big difference between graduating from a top-ranked law school and a lower-ranked law school is not really in the quality of the legal education. It's in the networking opportunities and the hireability in different locations. If you are going to go to a lower-ranking law school, try to go where you want to live, work, and practice. Most of them have good connections to local employers. They are not going to be able to help you get, you know, your state school in Iowa is not going to be able to help you get introduced to a big firm in New York. JD MPH program. Talk about really talk about how important it is to you in your personal statement. Get that in there. And then ask your recommenders to talk about that too. So personal statement and recommendations should convey your valuing of these 2 degrees equally. but also that you are going to be passionate enough about the JD program to spend the requisite time studying. You're also really going to want to convince them that you have the capacity to do both, that you are able to do two really, pretty tough programs in a dual way. That's a challenge. So have your recommenders talk about your amazing study skills and how you can balance a whole lot of balls in the air at the same time. Each year, the law schools drop the bottom 10% of the class. That is a broad overstatement. That is a very broad overstatement. That's one of those rumors that get passed around on Quora and Reddit. Certainly, if you are failing in law school, there are law schools that drop people that they feel do not have the potential to pass the bar because they don't want you any more than you want to graduate with $300,000 in debt and no potential to ever work in law. That's not good for their stats, and it's not good for your life. So if you are really doing horribly in law school, you might be encouraged to leave or you might be forced to leave, but every year they drop the bottom 10% is a broad overstatement. 2.88, realistically, how high does your LSAT need to be? As high as possible, depending on where you want to go, and submit an addendum. I would shoot for at least the 160s, and if you can get, a 170 score, opens a lot of doors. Not necessarily at the top 14, but definitely opens a lot of doors, especially at the mid-tier schools. It's better to be a splitter with a low GPA, high LSAT, but shoot that LSAT up as high as you possibly can. Let's see. Jonathan, physical therapists admitted to law schools. I have not had a physical therapist admitted to law school. I have had a couple of people who are in medical professions. I've had at least one nurse who went and was admitted to law school, and I have had, I believe, I can't remember if he was a chiropractor or an osteopath, but somebody who was in a medical adjacent profession as well admitted to law school. So that, certainly law schools like people who come from interesting backgrounds if you can convince them that you actually want to be a lawyer and you're not just sort of a dilettante who tries out different things and then drops them. Well, all right. Some of the best mid-tier schools, really depends on what you want to do. Fordham just jumped a whole bunch of spots in the ranking, so that's one where there are some signs that Fordham is becoming a better school than it was. That's one to look at. UT Austin is not mid-tier, but it's one of the underappreciated top tier that doesn't necessarily get as many applications as I feel like it deserves. Really, if you're going mid-tier though, versus like what's the best school? Okay, so macro level philosophical statement on law school rankings. Law professor is one of the hardest jobs in the world to get, and most people who have it say it's their dream job. Being a law professor is awesome. There are very few schools that produce a significant number of law professors, and they are all really good schools. And even if you go to one of these schools, you need to publish in peer-reviewed publications, make a name for yourself, practice law for a few years, and then go on the academic job market, which is really challenging. And that's, that is a tough road to walk to become a law professor, even at a very low-ranked law school. And then, if you're also living in a really good place to live, like, somewhere that there's both great weather, affordable housing, and nice people, then that's an even harder job to get. So every law school has amazing people as law professors. Every law school is going to be able to give you, if you are able to take full advantage of it, study hard, and do your best, every law school is going to be, as long as they are accredited, don't deal with these unaccredited profit farms, but every law school is going to have some great professors. Maybe there's a few bad ones, there will be some great ones. The big difference between mid-tier and top tier is just in where you get to work. So if you're going to go mid-tier, really think about where you want to live and work and apply to mid-tier schools there. Don't go to a low-ranking law school in a state that you would not want to practice law in. All right. I think we're both running out of questions, which you guys are awesome. Oh my God, you had so many questions. I don't think I've ever had people keep me this long with questions before. So kudos to you guys for being super enthusiastic about law school. But we're also running up against our 2 p.m. webinar that our Zoom login needs to be used for. So definitely, please keep us posted. Check out the podcast if you want to hear a little more from me right now or tomorrow or on your next drive if you're allowed to drive anywhere. But please keep in touch with us. We want to hear, for those of you who are already applying, tell us how you did. We love to hear success stories, and we can help if you're not a success story yet. And please keep coming to these webinars. We're continuing to do a ton of them. We're continuing for our LSATMax students to do office hours. This is, since we're all stuck inside anyway, perfect time to study for the LSAT. And I want to hear from all of you about how your personal statements went, how your applications went. Like, I tell everybody this and they don't think I mean it, but like, my favorite thing is when we hear from students that something went well. Bye. Thank you for coming.